Hello everyone, very welcome to my presentation on spatial healing. Let me begin with my thanks to the conference organizers for their hard working in the past month and for bringing us together for this amazing conference. It is my great pleasure and honor to share and discuss with you of my recent research. It is about living structure, about how to use it to bridge the two different concepts, space and place. Space is external to our body, while place is internal, or about our experience of space. The term spatial healing has two different meanings. First, it is about the healing effect of space on people. And secondly, it is about space to be healed, to become living or more living. Because it is experience-based, so place is very personal or subjective. Despite the personal or subjective nature of place, there is still a shared notion of goodness of place, of space among people, or even among different peoples. This is probably the key message I would like to convey with this presentation. The goodness of space or place can be measured through the concept of living structure or wholeness. Living structure is to beauty, but the temperature is to warmness. Long ago, there was no thermometer, so people had to rely on their feeling to see how warm something is. Now we can use thermometer or temperature to measure warmness. Now we are still relying on human feeling to know how good a space is. But in the near future, we may use Beautimate to measure how beautiful a space is. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the following key points. A good space has a healing or nurturing effect, while a bad space is damaging to our body or health. There are two different views of space, which are framed under the mechanistic worldview inherited from the science of the past 300 years. In contrast to the mechanistic view is the organic worldview of space, first conceived by the British philosopher Alfred Whitehead and further developed by Christopher Alexander. Under the organic worldview, space is seen as a living structure or wholeness, which is a mathematical structure of our external space. In essence, place is the reflection of the mathematical structure in our hearts and minds. I will talk about the two fundamental laws of living structure, scaling law and turbulence law, and I will make it clear why goodness of space is a matter of the fact rather than a matter of the opinion or personal preference. Research has long discovered that people who just had a surgery can get a quick recovery if they are exposed to some beautiful or natural scenes. This is a pair of landscape and open scene, but the left is more beautiful or more living than the right. This is another pair of mathematical curves, but the left coastline-like curves are more beautiful or more living than right, so-called curves. Here is a pair of patterns, but the left is so-called fractal structures, while the right is a collection of Euclidean geometric shapes. Again, the left is more living or more beautiful than the right. This is a pair of skyscrapers, but the left, actually the very first skyscraper, is more beautiful or more living than the right. All these pictures in the left are called living structure. Their counterpart to the right are less living or non-living structure. In terms of the healing effect of space, let me add another story. This is particularly relevant within the current COVID-19 pandemic. It was found out that some Russian women who exposed to the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster seem to enjoy better health than those who evacuated and relocated to other industrial modernist buildings. This is an incredible story. The point here is not that the nuclear radiation is not harmful, but that the living structure with which the woman has a good sense of the feeling or belonging seems to overcome the radiation damage. To this point, we may have some intuition or a sense of the feeling on the degree of liveliness or the degree of beauty. Here is a quiz. Among these two paintings, which one is more living or more beautiful? Composition to the left or configuration to the right? Think about that, and we will come back later on. Now let's move on. What is a space? Over the past 300 years of science, there are two different views of space: Newton absolute space and the Leibniz relational space. Both are framed under the Descartes' mechanistic worldview. In other words, the world or the external space out of our body is machine-like. This worldview has been so dominated in science and in our daily thinking, as if it were the only worldview, or as if it were a kind of the fact. Under Newton's absolute view, space is considered to be a container. Euclidean geometry or Cartesian analytical geometry was developed for describing and measuring the Earth's surface or other celestial bodies. Under the relational view, graph theory was developed to describe relationship between spaces. The current geographic information system was developed under these two views of space. A space is usually mechanistically represented by geometric primitives such as points, lines, polygons, and pixels. Raster and vector formats are commonly used representations. The thing is that these geometric primitives make little sense in our hearts and minds. The mechanistic model can be traced back to the 17th century. If you want to know how something works, you can pretend that it is a machine. It was because of this kind of Cartesian thought that one was able to find out how things work in the modern sense. It is important to note that the worldview is excellent, for what we have achieved in science and technology is really because of this mental model. However, this mental model is limited, and it has two devastating results. The first is that the I went out of the word picture. The picture of the world as a machine does not have the I in it. The I, what it means to be a person, the inner experience of being a person, just isn't part of the picture. Second, the picture of the world we have from physics, because it is built only out of mental machines, no longer has any definite feeling of value in it. The value has become sidelined as a matter of opinion, not intrinsic to the nature of the world itself. As any inevitable consequences, the goodness of design or art cannot be objectively assessed, or they lack a hard standard for assessing goodness of design or art. The thing is that the worldview is so dominated, as if it were the only mental mode of the world, or even worse, it may be perceived as what itself. As a matter of the fact, the real world is organism-like rather than machine-like. It is the British philosopher Alfred Whitehead who first conceived an organic worldview. This holistic organic worldview contains both external space and our internal experience. In other words, we human beings are part of the real world. The great architect Christopher Alexander has further developed this worldview and formulated the third view of space. Space is neither lifeless nor neutral, but a living structure capable of being more living or less living. Let's look at how space is more organism-like rather than machine-like. This is the historic center of the German city Hamburg around the 19th century. It looks very much like the human brain. What I want to stress is that it not only looks like an organ, but also works as a biological entity. There is a common misperception that urban design or planning is viewed as a Lego-like assembly of prefabricated elements. As a matter of the fact, a city is an embryo-like growth with persistent adaptation to its circumstances. Amsterdam presents an excellent example of how a city is emerged or evolved very much like an embryo to become a human body. Another good example of living structure is Venice. What I want to stress is that it is not because of the fish-like shape, but some deeper structure that we call it a living structure. Now let's look at what a space is. A space is a human experienced space. A good sense of feelings such as pride, belonging, well-being, and healing. A bad sense of the feelings such as anxiety, stress, fear, and uneasiness. So a good space means living structure, while a bad space means non-living or dead structure. It is important to note that between living and non-living, there is a wide range of the spectrum, just as between the warm and the cold, there is a wide range of the temperature. To better understand place or our experience of space, we must first understand what wholeness or what living structure is. To make it clear the concept of the wholeness, let's look at these two papers. One paper with a tiny dot in it to the left, and the other empty one to the right. To examine how these two papers differ from each other structurally or in terms of the underlying living structure, we must understand what effect this tiny dot brings. The dot is very tiny, but its effect is devastating. It means one is living structure, while the other is dead structure. Why? The introduction of the tiny dot to the paper is able to induce about 20 substructures or centers in terms of the Alexander. The 20 centers, as shown in the slides, are as follows. The paper itself, number 1, the dot, number 2, the halo surrounding the dot, 3, the left and the right rectangle, the bottom and the top rectangle, and so on and so forth. These 20 substructures are not isolated, but form an interconnected whole. From the coherent whole, we see clearly there are far more small substructures than larger ones, not in terms of their size, but their degree of liveness. So it is apparently a living structure with a very steep hierarchy. On the other hand, the empty paper is only with 5 substructures, the paper itself plus the 4 corners. So it has a very flat hierarchy and a very small number of substructures. So it is a dead structure. Having examined the simple example of living structure, now let's turn to its formal definition. It is such structure in which there are far more small substructures than larger ones, with an inherent hierarchy. It is governed by 2 fundamental laws, scaling law across the hierarchy levels, and turbulence law on each of the hierarchy. Note that it is not more small than largest, but far more small than largest. The notion of the far more small than largest does not occur just once, but occurs or recurs multiple times. Scaling law is also called spatial heterogeneity. There are far more small things than larger ones across all scales, ranging from the smallest to the largest in geographical space or the Earth's surface or any living structure. Importantly, the scaling of far more small things than larger ones recurs multiple times rather than just once at different level of scale. Turbulence law is also called the first law of geography, and it is about spatial homogeneity. Everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. In essence, nearby things tend to be more or less similar or related. These 2 laws are complementary to each other rather than contradictory to each other. Scaling law and turbulence law work together for characterizing the Earth's surface or any living structure in general. These 2 laws are basic law about the 2 spatial properties, spatial heterogeneity and spatial homogeneity. Scaling law is about the interdependency, while turbulence law about the spatial dependency. It is important to note the difference between interdependency and dependency. Dependency implies dependency at a local scale. For example, my housing price depends on those of my neighbors. However, interdependency implies more convoluted and more complicated dependency at a global scale, and again endlessly. Let me use the story of fish tank to elaborate on their difference. If you bought 100 fish, golden fish, and with the same size at the very beginning, if one day one fish eats a bit more and gets a bit bigger, as time goes, there would be the effect of the rich get rich and the poor get poor. Among the 100 fish, there would be many small fish, while a very few larger ones in the end. This result of the far more small fish than larger ones comes from the interdependence effect through the interaction, competition, and communication. So scaling law is available across all scales, ranging from the smallest to the largest. The scaling is also called scale-free or long-tailed. It indicates disproportion rather than proportion. Scaling law implies complexity or non-equilibrium character. Based on these two laws, it is not difficult to conclude that the Earth's surface is a living structure at different levels of scale: the global scale, the continental scale, the country scale, the city scale, and the building facade scale. To this point, we can also conclude that goodness of space or structure is a matter of the fact. Herewith, for each pair of these structures, the left structure is more beautiful or more living than the right. Why? The short answer is the left is more complex than the right. A general rule about goodness of space goes like this: the more substructures, the more beautiful. The higher hierarchy, the more beautiful. The cathedral facade has over 500 substructures, while the modernist one has only 50 substructures. More importantly, the 500 substructures have 6 hierarchical levels indicated by different colors, while the 50 substructures have only 2 hierarchical levels. Here is another example: 2 UCL logos. Again, the left is more living or more beautiful than the right. It appears that people of our times have lost their sense of the beauty, affected by modernism, postmodernism, deconstructionism, and a host of other reasons. It is time to recover our sense of beauty, which came with us when we were born. Now, let's come back to these 2 paintings. It is not difficult to find out painting B is more living or more beautiful than painting A. Let's take a close look as to why. Under the mechanistic view, paintings A and B consist of respectively 7 and 9 substructures. However, under the organic view of space, they consist of respectively 18 and 20 recursively defined substructures. Both are emerged or evolved from the empty square in a step-by-step fashion. Importantly, there are always far more newborn substructures than older ones, or newly generated substructures than older ones. For example, from 1 to 4 or from 4 to 6. These 2 paintings differ only at the last step. From E to F, it is not far more newborns than older ones, because 6 and 7 are more similar. However, from E to G, there is indeed far more newborns than other ones. Eventually, painting B is more living or more beautiful than painting A. Okay, it is time to draw a conclusion of this presentation. There are a few points to highlight. Space and place are not separated as currently conceived under the mechanistic worldview, but can be bridged together through the very concept of the wholeness or under the organic world picture. Second, goodness of space can be objectively or structurally judged as a matter of the fact rather than opinion or personal preference. The more substructures, the more beautiful. The high hierarchy, the more beautiful. Third, the goodness of space can be well reflected as our inner experience with a good sense of the feelings such as proud, belonging, well-being, and healing. Here is a list of my recent papers on which this presentation is based. The first paper demonstrated that not only a map, but also the territory or the Earth's surface in general is a living structure, and argues that it is essentially the living structure that makes maps and mapping possible. The second paper is to defend living structure as a physical phenomenon, just as air. We cannot see it, but it's in our surrounding. The third paper is to argue that the goodness of space is not a matter of the opinion or personal preference, but a matter of the fact and can be well measured or quantified. The last paper was to establish wholeness or living structure as a scientific foundation of sustainable urban design and planning. For this topic, I have not got much time into the detail in this presentation, but I hope I will have future opportunity to further discuss with you. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I have enjoyed the presentation. Any questions, comments are more than welcome.